Viking raids are often remembered for fire, steel, and sudden terror. But for the women who survived the chaos, the nightmare did not end when the fighting stopped. In the aftermath of a raid, long before sagas were written and legends were polished, the fate of captured women became one of the darkest chapters of Norse expansion, one shaped by harsh economics, shifting power, and a world where survival often depended on the whims of those holding the swords. These raids were not random explosions of violence. They were calculated operations driven by wealth, opportunity, and the demand for human labor. And women were among the most valuable targets, captured not only for physical work but for social leverage, political bargaining, and forced integration into Viking households. Their lives could change in a single hour and rarely for the better. Before proceeding, let me know in a more professional way from which part of the world you are watching this video. The testimonies that survived, written by monks, travelers, and even Viking poets themselves, paint a disturbing but very real picture. In the Annals of Ulster, monks recorded villages in Ireland being stripped of people the way others would strip gold. Ibn Fadlan, witnessing Norse culture firsthand, described how enslaved women were kept under strict control, treated as property rather than people. And Norse sagas, though poetic, often reveal truths hidden within their verses. Women taken, traded, or transported across seas without any say in their fate. Once a village fell, Viking raiders moved quickly. Women were separated from their families, sometimes gathered into groups and guarded closely. The separation itself was cruel enough, children crying for mothers, husbands shouting helplessly, but Vikings believed hesitation made their work slower. They valued speed. They valued efficiency. They valued what they considered profit. For many women, the journey began right there on the shoreline, where long ships waited with their carved prows and restless oarsmen. These ships were not built for comfort, they were built for speed, and the women taken aboard were often given only the bare minimum of space. The Vikings weren't trying to torment them, they simply saw them as cargo. The long journey ahead was difficult even for trained warriors, for frightened captives. It became a slow, exhausting passage into the unknown. The rough waves, cold winds, and tight confines of the ships were only part of the ordeal. What made the voyage truly harrowing was the uncertainty. Some women whispered prayers, others tried to remember the direction of home, but none knew where they were being taken. Scandinavia, Ireland, the trading hubs of the Baltic, or perhaps farther still to markets in the Islamic world, where Norse merchants regularly sold slaves for silver, spices, and weapons. Those taken to Scandinavia faced a different kind of fate. The sagas often mention thralls, enslaved people who worked inside homes, on farms, or in workshops. Viking households depended heavily on this forced labor. Women were often assigned to cooking, cleaning, weaving, tending livestock, or raising children that were not their own. It was not always physical harm that defined their suffering. It was the total lack of freedom, the loss of identity, the constant reminder that they did not belong. Some women were given to chieftains as trophies of victory. Others were offered as part of alliances, exchanged between Viking leaders to strengthen political ties. These women became bargaining chips, symbols of loyalty or dominance. Their personal desires, fears, or dreams were never part of the equation. Those taken farther, especially toward markets connected to the Islamic Caliphate, encountered a world both different and equally dangerous. Viking traders valued women highly in these routes because buyers paid large sums for skilled workers or individuals who could serve in noble households. The journey was long and harsh, consisting of river crossings, portages, and weeks of walking. Captives rarely had proper clothing or food. They were kept in groups, guarded constantly, and watched for any sign of escape. By the time they reached the bustling trade centers of the East, the exhaustion on their faces revealed everything. Markets were loud, crowded, overwhelming. Buyers inspected captives with cold calculation. The women stood waiting, knowing they had no voice in what would happen next. Not all captives ended up in markets. Some were taken directly to Viking settlements. These villages, carved into the rugged landscapes of Norway, Sweden, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands, presented a life that was structured, disciplined, and ruled by strict social hierarchy. Women brought there were often forced into domestic service, waking before sunrise, working past nightfall, and answering to masters who believed obedience was their duty. Physical punishment was not always common, but control was ever present. Captives who tried to flee faced severe consequences, being bound, isolated, or returned to work with relentless surveillance. The threat of punishment alone kept many from resisting. Most accepted their fate quietly, because resistance rarely led anywhere except deeper suffering. Children born to captive women and Viking households were considered part of the family structure, but reminded constantly of their mixed origins. Some grew up as thralls, others were freed later in life, and a few even rose to important positions if their fathers acknowledged them. But for the mothers, the experience was far more complicated. Their children could become their only source of comfort, yet also the very reason they remained tied to the households that controlled them. Some women experienced a slightly different reality. A few captives, particularly those who displayed intelligence, resilience, or unique skills, were eventually integrated more fully into Viking life. They worked closely with the families, managed domestic affairs, or engaged in specialized tasks. They were still not free, but their daily lives were less harsh than those kept strictly as laborers. Even so, the shadow of captivity never fully disappeared. Their memories of home remained vivid, haunting them during quiet moments, faces of loved ones, landscapes they would never see again, and the life they once believed was stable and safe. This was the overlooked truth behind Viking raids. Not all devastation came from weapons. Some of the deepest suffering began after the fires died down, after the warriors left the coast, after the world fell silent. The physical destruction could be repaired. The emotional scars carried by those taken could not. Part of what made these experiences so devastating was not just physical hardship, but the uncertainty that stretched for months or even years. Many women taken in Viking raids were moved from place to place without warning. A long chain of temporary owners, shifting destinations, and changing fates. Some ended up on ships bound for Scandinavia. Others were sold in markets where buyers from the British Isles, the Frankish kingdoms, and even the Baltic regions waited with silver in hand. Every new exchange meant a new life, a new set of rules, and new expectations that offered little comfort. Yet the story did not end at the markets. Many women were absorbed into Viking societies in ways that varied widely. Some worked in fields, barns, or kitchens, handling heavy labor that families depended on. Others were placed inside households where expectations were strict, and their position in the hierarchy was unmistakable. Life in these homes was controlled, structured, and filled with tasks that had to be performed daily, with little room for rest or personal choice. A woman's entire day might be decided for her before the sun even rose. In some regions, captured women were used as a form of economic investment. Wealthier Vikings often purchased them not for immediate labor, but because their presence increased the household status. They could be assigned to spinning, weaving, and preparing supplies that supported long-distance trade, essential work that brought wealth to their captors. While these roles spared them from the brutalities of travel or markets, they still lived under constant supervision, with their movements and decisions controlled by others. For others, the journey did not end in Scandinavia at all. Viking traders traveled extensively, especially along the rivers of Eastern Europe, reaching the markets of the Islamic world. Historical accounts describe ships filled with both men and women taken from raids, transported across vast distances where cultures, languages, and expectations were completely different. Here, women faced environments where their fate depended entirely on the intentions of buyers who had no connection to their homeland or their past. Some served in large households. Others performed tasks that maintained the estates of wealthy merchants. Their lives became part of a world they had never imagined, far from their families, their communities, and everything familiar. Despite this, not all captured women remained in servitude for life. Some gradually earned a position within the household, especially those who gained trust, skills, or roles seen as valuable. Over time, a few were granted more stable living conditions, and in rare cases, they built new identities in the societies where they were taken. There are historical records of women who became integrated into Norse families, raised children, managed tasks alongside other members of the household, and lived out lives that, while far from free, were not defined by constant fear. But these stories were exceptions, and they happened only after women endured years of hardship, uncertainty, and forced adaptation. There were also instances where captured women became political tools. During conflicts between Viking groups and neighboring kingdoms, female captives were occasionally exchanged. As part of negotiations, these women found themselves thrust into diplomatic roles they never asked for, expected to serve as symbols of peace or loyalty. Their presence in a rival court was a constant reminder of shifting power, and their personal desires rarely mattered in these arrangements. They lived with the knowledge that their fate depended entirely on political decisions they had no control over. The emotional toll of these experiences was enormous. Many women carried the weight of displacement, fear, and instability for the rest of their lives. Even those who eventually found security within Viking society lived with the memory of what they had endured on the journey. Their resilience was extraordinary, but it came at a cost that history seldom acknowledges. These women were not just victims of raids, they were individuals whose lives were reshaped, redirected, and often overshadowed by forces far beyond their control. And yet, scattered through historical records and archaeological findings, signs of their presence still remain: rings, combs, beads, and tools that hint at daily routines, skills, and identities. These silent objects remind us that behind every raid, every market, and every household role was a real person who adapted to circumstances they never chose. Their stories reveal a deeper, more complex side of Viking history, one marked not only by exploration and conquest, but by human experiences that were often painful, hidden, and unspoken. Understanding this part of Viking society is essential because it uncovers the human cost behind the legends. It reminds us that the past was shaped not only by warriors, kings, and explorers, but also by countless individuals whose voices were rarely recorded. Their experiences challenge the romanticized image of Viking culture and invite us to look at history with greater honesty and depth. If you'd like more episodes that explore the untold truths behind famous historical cultures, make sure to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know which part of Viking history you want uncovered next. History is full of stories that were never meant to be forgotten, and together, we're bringing them back into the light.